Well, welcome everybody to our AMA this week. We're joined by Drew Rich. We're going to talk about processing and growth and all the fun stuff that goes along with it. So thanks for joining us, Drew.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amazing. So your background, let's get into how you got to where you are today. It sounded like you started on the processing side, went over to marketing, then back over to processing. Can you give us a little background on how you got here?
So actually, I was working in the cannabis industry as a commercial realtor, commercial broker, trying to find industrial space for operators, trying to find retail locations for dispensaries, and that kind of honest to God, I was in the office late. I got a call from a dispensary operator that their zoning changed on their property, and they had a matter of days before they could, um, before they had to execute for the next stage of their licensing, and so they had to find a new location. So I spent 3-4 days with these guys. We found a location, executed the deal. After the lease was signed, the president of that company, pulled me aside and said, I think you should come sell cannabis for me and stop selling real estate. And at the time, I took like a 70% pay cut, but I saw I saw what was coming. I mean, I was young enough at the time that I could afford to do that, to be able to start, based essentially at the beginning of an operation. And that's where I got my feet wet. He brought me on as a regional sales, as a bullish, tiny MSO out of Arizona that got acquired by Cresco 8 months after I started with them. And that's kind of how I got my transition to the more corporate side of cannabis. I worked for MPX, ran operations for Iantis for 3 or 4 years, the state of Maryland, oversaw, the entire state. I was the GM and vice president of operations for the state. SunMed was a supplier in the state of Maryland that I had done business with for a number of years as a buyer at both the initial operation I worked for, which was just an independent processor, and then working for Iantis, where I was running retail and processing, wholesale and sourcing material. So SunMed and I had a rapport for a long time, and then they got an opportunity to acquire a processing license. They had been a cultivator solely for the beginning 4 years of the market here in Maryland, and an opportunity presented itself. I moved up here to where I now reside and been here 3 years, and it's been a lot of fun. And it's one of those things we say about SunMed. When the Yankees call, you pick up the phone.
Well,
so
you were at the Mets, though.
Yeah, yeah, eventually, yeah.
Yeah, that's really funny. So it's funny when you take risks early in your career, it feels so big, but it's also so much less risky because you don't have, in some cases, a family. You don't have, all the mortgage payment, all the stuff. So,
Yeah.
I applaud risk early. Nice job.
And the reality is, and I think, if there are people that are listening to this that are bullish on, being their own business owner, a small business owner and an entrepreneur in this space, I basically had that role, but somebody was paying me to do it. Right. And That's the way they got to look at it. Like I put in crazy hours. I mean, the first operation I ran was 2.5 hours from my house. And I drove there 3 days a week. So the first 12 months in the cannabis space, I probably put 140,000 miles on the road
because I was to get a hotel room.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, there was actually a rental property that the company owned that I would crash at, where we had other guys that were all working for us that were living at. But I mean, I was making all the deliveries, making all the sales, helping package. I mean, you better be ready to do everything under the sun, and don't feel that you're special because you own the company. I mean, get ready to get your hands dirty and grind. Because if you're going to be, why I've been successful in this space is because I've always had the mentality that you got to lead by example, and you got to be willing to do every little job that there is and grind it out. And I mean, the first operation I ran was a staff of 4 people, right? And so you wore many hats, and that's just what it was, because you got to get revenue positive before you can really start filling out your staff. And that's 100%. Where you as that business owner need to be ready.
Oh, you just
so.
Yep. I totally, I see that some of the hardest parts of growth are in those initial stages where you're not making a paycheck, you're doing all the work, you're trying to figure it out as you go, but you still got to hire more people,
Right.
and your revenue doesn't count up for that. And taking on outside investment is fraught with risk, and then you have shareholders to deal with, and so on. It's probably the hardest part of running a business is that early stage before, well, pre-revenue or pre-profitability. Um, what's funny is over time you stop being able to jump in and do anybody's job because it gets so broad. My assumption is that you're at that point where you're not going to go in and adjust the nutrients.
Now, I mean, so I'm strictly on our processing side of the business. I run that's how it works in Maryland market. Some markets are different, but we have three types of licenses: cultivation, processing, and dispensing. So there's a director of ops for the grow license, and then I'm the director of ops for the processing license, and run
Understood.
everything under that umbrella. But yeah, with that being said, I've got 45 people on staff now. So it's where it started and where we are today. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't believe we're starting the 8th year for me of being in the cannabis industry. It's pretty crazy.
It is pretty crazy. We got started a little bit before you did, but 8 years seems like a eternity looking backwards, right?
Yeah.
But in any other industry, that's blink of an eye. Here, it's grind every day. So when you're looking at your production facilities on a day-to-day basis, obviously you just got a call about something happening that you need to deal with imminently, but what KPIs are you looking at? What are you looking at when you walk in the door to see how things are going?
Yeah, I think, the biggest one you're looking at is revenue per head count, right? What's my what output am I getting per person that I have on staff? That's critical. Automation plays a major factor in that. I think people that are, afraid to make investments early on or try to take on, more partners or more capital, whatever you think it's going to cost, you probably need to 3x it.
Yeah.
And make the investments in the automation because, where we are now, I've got operations that typically would take 8 to 12 people if I'm doing it by hand. And now I have a staff of 3 doing it. And it's 3 times the production in that same amount of time that the 8 people would have taken, right? As an example.
Yeah.
So, that's where you need to get as lean as possible. Don't be afraid to make investments is my point in automation and packaging, because they'll pay dividends down the road.
So how quickly do the automation, how quickly does it evolve? So if you do a big CapEx this year and you're investing in your infrastructure, how long does that infrastructure last with the growth of your company in addition to the innovations that are happening in automation?
I think you keep it simple, right? Especially for people who are trying to acquire processing licenses, like, oh, I want to put out vape cards. Especially now in the marketplace, there's more than one supplier that can sell you very comparable equipment that can, automate the filling of your vapes. That's going to save you tons on labor, and that's a simple one, right? That's a $40,000 investment that will pay dividends right away. You'll see an ROI on that right away. Same thing on labeling machines. They're anywhere from a $5,000 to $15,000 investment, but instead of labeling all your packaging by hand, because the amount of labels you got to put on cannabis packaging is relentless, and so you figure out a way to do it faster. And there's the nice thing is now that we're, the one thing that was a disadvantage when I think you and I and people who have been in this for a long time, there wasn't a lot of automation available or a lot of ancillary companies that were supplying the industry. And now that's not the same, right? You go to MJ BizCon now and it's crazy, right? So I think that's an advantage to launching now is, yes, you're maybe entering into a market that's already established or mature, but the options you're going to have in terms of equipment available to purchase to help you get your operation so that you don't really have to think too much about it, you know. But that's where I would start, is simple investments in automation.
100%. What are you using, if you don't mind me asking, as an ERP to track your costs and your production and so on?
Yeah, so we use Acumatica.
Yeah.
And that really kind of, I mean, especially because cannabis, it's tricky, especially when you go from like you enter into the processing world. Well, now you don't have these perfect formulations where you go, well, X amount of biomass equals
Right.
X grams of finished product. You know, yields come into play, right? And they're always different. And the weight of the plant is always going to be your static, but the content on that weight of that plant is what changes.
Right.
And so, yeah, finding an ERP that can kind of track that as well,
Yeah,
is tricky, and that's where we've always struggled. But Acumatica seems to do a good job.
Looking back on our traditional side of our business, we've dealt a lot with food manufacturers. The variables are very small, right? You know that you're getting one kernel of popcorn. You know what essentially is going to come out the other end. With cannabis, it is so different. And do you trust the testing of the potency in your market?
So I think the most important thing about testing is that in whatever defined marketplace you're in, it's consistent and equal amongst all the producers.
Mm.
Right?
It doesn't matter if the baseline is up here as long as everybody's using the same one.
Yeah. You know, and that's what I see in Maryland. They have a standard that's been now generally accepted across all our independent testing labs.
Right.
It's called the dry weight equivalency. Excuse me. I want to make sure I got the wording right. Dry weight equivalency. So what they do is, you know, bud, when it's tested or when you smoke it, the moisture content's anywhere from 8 to 12%, right? Typically. Mm. They're saying, well, what would the potency be if it was 0% water content? So you're seeing like a 3 or 4 point bump from that. And so that's my art. That's why I make the argument. As long as it's fair in your marketplace, and you have a system where you can, you know, actually define, you know, low, medium, high tier, then I think, you know, testing is what it is.
Right. 100%. I read a stat that you make 14,000 pre-rolls a day. Does that sound right?
I think it's probably higher than that now.
Holy cow.
So yeah, that's another good one. So we partner with this company called Accelerant, and they're a no capex automation supplier. Basically what they do is it's a royalty fee on every pre-roll that you sell or that they make. But it's great because when there's an upgrade, we get it. When the machine goes down, they're here right away.
It's hardware as a service.
When they come up with the latest and greatest model, great. Here it comes. We'll swap it out. We'll take the old one back, and we'll give you a new one. Instead of, you know, sinking $350,000 into a pre-roll automation, and then you're stuck with that guy, you know. And now we have 3 of them running. That's why I said I think it's probably more than 14,000 because we have 3 of them running. Yeah,
that's day. Brilliant. It could also be very costly when you're taking something, you know, as a flat rate, and then you don't know how much you're going to be able to sell it for in the long run. That could be challenging.
Yeah.
How's the price of flower in your market? How are things going?
It's pretty stable. I mean, what we're seeing kind of right now is you know, that like the state, I do have to, you don't hear this often, but I do think the regulators in the state of Maryland have done a good job in terms of.
You just want to pass your next inspection. I see what's up.
I mean, maybe, but no, I mean, honestly, like supply and demand is pretty, you know, we don't have a saturated market with material like you do in other states where then, you know, the price bottoms out because what else are you going to do? Right. It's got to move. Everything moves at a price. Right. So I think that they've done a nice job where there's stability in our market. I think the pricing is fair. I think the one thing that nobody else talks about is the inflation that we've seen over the last, 2 to 3 years. You haven't seen it in cannabis. We're not
No.
raising our prices, right?
Right.
We're paying our people more, but we're not raising our prices.
Right.
So, to some extent, you got to realize the purchasing power of the dollar that exists today and see what you're actually paying for cannabis and say, okay, my cannabis got cheaper because the price didn't go up in accordance with inflation. That's how I look at that. But yeah, I think, we're in a good place in Maryland. Um, as one of the largest growers, you would think we would have concern for, too much material or growing too much, but the market is absorbing everything that everybody in the state of Maryland is growing right now. And I think that's a perfect place for where these new licenses are going to be coming on. There's opportunity for them as the market continues to grow. And I think it's been a very nice organic, economic growth that we've seen since the launch of adult use last year.
I love hearing that because in so many markets, that's just not the case. I mean, almost every market's a case study on how not to do it. It's nice to hear that is going well for you guys. So,
and it's it's exponential growth over time, right? Where it's we went from averaging last year, the first 6 months of the market, somewhere around 90 million. And now we're up to like 97 million a month. So, market's slowly growing.
Amazing. That's really great. Do you see the number of consumers increasing over time, or is this just demand that already exists and is latent?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we struggle with here in Maryland, as every market's so different, is our going from a medical to adult use market. Our marketing regs actually got more stringent.
Oh, no
so
kidding.
When we could advertise on billboards in a medical market, we were not allowed to in an adult use market. So there's no radio, there's no television, there's no outdoor advertising allowed unless it's your actual physical building. You're allowed to paint your logo on the side of your building, but that's as far as that goes. So, it's hard. I think there's a population in Maryland that still don't realize that cannabis is legal. Unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They're still getting it from their guy on the couch.
Yeah.
Or in the car or whatever. So jumping back to production, we have a question about a costly mistake. What have you seen other people do that gets them in trouble when they're starting?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Sourcing biomass. You better know, which is why I push new operators that are non-cannabis consumers and aren't acquainted with the plant. You should probably just be buying distillate, and it's a very straight
Know what
up,
you're getting.
Exactly, right? Like there's no yields that you got to worry about getting after when you extract from the plant.
Yeah.
That to me is like where you can really get yourself upside down, is if you buy biomass and don't get your intended yield that you need in order to make a product. I'll give you an example. We've bought material before where we needed our cost per gram of distillate that we got from that biomass to be somewhere between $12 and $15 a gram, right? That was okay. In terms of what our, finished cost of goods sold was. We were at like $60 a gram because the trim that we bought was so poor, but the market, that was all that we could buy, right? So, I think that's where you're really going to watch out. And like, I don't know if they're available, but like put yourself together a calculator, just on Excel where all right, if I buy this amount of trim and I need, in order for me to make that profitable, I need a minimum of, 10% yield or 15% yield, be able to manipulate that and see what your actual, revenue on the back end is going to look like, so that at least you're safe, and I think that's where I've made mistakes. That's where I learned the most, right? Don't be afraid to go and visually inspect the product before you purchase.
Yeah.
I made a career out of doing that as a buyer, right? Like I was always on the road. And so that's why I say, like, if you're not really familiar with the cannabis plant or what to be looking for, or you have somebody that works for you that does, you should be sourcing distillate, keep it simple, put in a little kitchen, make a niche edible, take your little piece of the market, or make a, find a fun type of hardware and make, a small boutique amount of vapes every month and find your 15 or 20 dispensaries that you supply and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good advice. A lot of folks look at this market and think about how they can scale right off the bat, but just getting to market's really hard. Scaling's a whole set of different problems that you need to deal with later. Starting small is really good advice. Yeah. So when you're looking at your waste that comes out the other end, how do you deal with that? What I know there are regs around it, but like that's a lot.
So the previous facility was in a much more urban environment. We were in an industrial complex in the middle of a city. And so the way we would have to dispose of our green waste is because we were putting it into a dumpster outside of our facility that wasn't behind a closed fence line.
Sure.
There was a padlock on the dumpster that us and the dumpster truck driver had the combo to. And the bags had to be, even though it was like spent biomass, there's nothing on it. We still had to do a 50-50 blend of like cat litter and sawdust and the biomass. So you have these heavy ass, hefty bags that you're lifting into this dumpster. Now where we are, we're about a 70-acre campus. So we have a huge field. We're when they harvest on the greenhouse side, the pots, the soil from the pots, it all goes to the same place. So does our green waste. And so, we literally have a big front loader that we load up with all the green waste, and it goes up to the top of the hill, and there's a massive compost pile.
Wow. Yeah. That waste management is a significant problem for our industry. And there are some companies, one company won this award at Benzinga a few years ago for a waste management service. I don't know where they went with it, but it seems like you can't just have anybody pick up your waste. It has to be a very specific company that has very specific procedures, because once it leaves your facility, obviously not your problem, but it's still the same issue for the state, right?
100%. And a facility like ours, just to give people context, like in a week, if I'm at max capacity, I'm going through 1,400 pounds of wet material, fresh frozen, and another 800 pounds of cured material, trim. So that we're talking 100,000 plus pounds a year of green waste biomass that I need to do something with. Yeah, it's you need to figure it out for sure.
Did you say flash frozen?
Yeah.
I don't know. Tell me more.
Okay.
When does it get frozen? Why?
So the whole concept of live resin, I'm sure you've heard that term. That comes from the way that you prepare the biomass for making live resin or live rosin is when the plant is harvested, instead of it going to dry and then cure, you actually are going to go ahead and debuck it, right? And then all the buds are then going to be frozen with some sort of dry ice or whatever, or a liquid nitrogen tunnel.
That's the live component of it. It's not dry
because you're capturing all those terpenes while the plant's still alive. So that's what happens is terpene content when you're drying and curing, the terpenes are evaporating constantly. So you're losing all that content, and certain terpenes are more volatile than others. So the advantage to live resin is the concentration of like some of people's favorite terpenes, such as like myrcene and terpenoline. They're a couple of the more popular ones. In a live resin product, we're going to capture more of that when we harvest, because we're going to freeze it right away. And then when we extract it, we're extracting at really cold temperatures anyway, so that plant material is never going to thaw.
It's fascinating. I don't know much about the production side. Most of our clients and most of the work that let me rephrase that. Most of the clients that I've worked with are either in grow or retail. Production is such a small part of the market. I don't have a ton of exposure to it, so I find this fascinating. What
Interesting.
are some of the other things that people that are not very familiar with production wouldn't know about production looking from the outside?
Um, I think people, especially as we get further and further down the road with national decriminalization and it becoming an FDA regulated product, that it's not the cannabis that, you know, like people like for extraction purposes, right? Like we use butane here, and it's not like we're extracting it in a garage, right, with a couple of glass pipes. It's it's a very pharmaceutical grade cleanliness type facility. We have a 600 square foot C1D1, right? My point being is that like the FDA regs are coming, so make sure that your facility is like you're already doing all the things that a CGMP facility would do, as if
Yeah.
you're in the pharmaceutical industry. Like that's where we're at, right? Like when I first got into this, it was an open room. We may put some hairnets on, but
Yeah.
you're in your street clothes
Yeah.
and you're jamming out to hip hop, and maybe people are even smoking in the room there, right there in the room, and you're just packaging product. Now it's full scrubs, lab coats, full PPE,
Hmm.
like changeable shoes, like the whole nine,
Yep.
clean rooms that we clean head to toe on a daily basis. Like that's which is nice because we can make the end consumer feel good about the products that they're buying. But at the same time, like it's not cannabis of the '90s. This is FDA regulated cannabis. That's where we're going.
It's where we're going, but it's where most of the industry isn't quite capable of, right? Like we come into a lot of grows and a lot of production where it's not going to cut mustard, not at all. One of my oldest friends in the industry is a consultant on good safety practices, and she is one of the busiest people I know. It does seem like the focus is more on getting ready for regulations. I also wonder how prepared one can be when we don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Right, and I think the safest thing I think I go back to the regulators in Maryland that they kind of pushed upon us was to in order for us to sell high dose edibles in the state of Maryland, we have to be CGMP certified. So
Mhm.
that alone, I think, in our minds was like,
Yeah,
this is how we can prepare best. We're going to
yeah,
build a new facility. It's going to be built to those standards so that when the day comes and the FDA walks in the door, the CGMP is to FDA standards, right?
right.
So like that's, and the nice thing is I'll put this out there. There are great consultants that are in the marketplace. There are, you know, just compliance consultants people, and then there's actual firms that'll come in and you know, they'll help you. They'll do your audit for you. They'll get your certification. Perry Johnson is the one that we use out of Ohio. They've been instrumental. But they come in, they do the whole audit. They spend 3 days with you. My point being is like there is consultants available in the marketplace. Just like your friend. So that's we're getting there.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Gonna pass it on to any closing thoughts. I don't see a lot of questions coming in, so I have a long list of your background and some other questions I can throw in there. But what do you say to those to people that are coming over from other industries, right? Like you did. One of the things that I look at when I'm hiring folks are people that have comparable knowledge in other industries that can come over and translate. What would you say to people that are coming in, other than what you said earlier?
Yeah, I would say don't expect to get a high paying job right out the gate. Recognize that regardless of the fact you're going to cannabis and you think it's a green rush and everybody's making tons of money at the end of the day, I don't think that's exactly the case. To be honest, I think it's where we are today. It's a conventional business with extra handicaps that we have to deal with, and so just be aware that like if you get into cannabis,
know what you're getting into.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah, I get that. I do have one more question. Do you guys do processing for other brands?
So we do. So we have a couple of national brands that we white label for. Aero Pro is a vape brand that we love. That we've been with them for 3 years now. Cookies, actually, we do their flour as well as their processed products. Belushi Farms, we partner with Jim and the team on both the cultivation and processing side, and then we're just now bringing on the guys over at Gentleman Smuggler.
So when you're doing that for other brands, how stringent are their requirements?
I think if you're a brand that has all these 13 plus states, like you do need to have very strict SOPs just to keep your product quality and expectation and experience for the end consumer consistent. For us, we were in a position where we're set up pretty well. We've got a great team and we execute well. So a lot of times in these negotiations, it's hey, we're going to do it our way, and you're going to get a check at the end of the month.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. When again, people are scaling out to different states, I don't know that everybody quite realizes how much they need to have their act together to give somebody else the instructions to do what they do naturally. That's hard. It's a big gap.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Drew, thanks again for taking the time today to meet with me and discuss this live on LinkedIn.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me. When you're in Maryland next,
I'll hit you up.
Come up and take a tour.
I would love that. Thank you very much. And if you find yourself in LA, I promise our AC will be working, and you're welcome to pop in and hang out.
There you go.
All right. Thanks again, man.
All right. See ya.
All right. Take care.